So European Union frequently emphasizes sustainability, human rights, and also very strict global standards. My question would be, how does the EU ensure that this approach with good intention remains fair and does not become a barrier for developing and emerging countries like Indonesia?
Yes, this is a very sensitive question, and perhaps the one that I've been asked the most over the last almost 3 years in Indonesia. And I know that our Indonesian friends feel very strongly about it. We take it very seriously. For the EU, and it's not the EU as a bureaucratic organization, it's EU citizens. For EU citizens, it's not at all about creating barriers or ensuring protectionism. It's just making sure that economic growth is fair, sustainable, and inclusive. And so European citizens ask for a number of initiatives that appear sometimes here in Indonesia as preventing the growth of Indonesia. What we do to mitigate this impression is, first of all, we have a lot of dialogue. So in the case of palm oil, we set up a specific joint task force with Malaysia and Indonesia on EU Deforestation Regulation. And that task force met several times, both in Brussels, in Jakarta, in Malaysia. And we really heard very loud and clear the comments made by Indonesia. And this has played a part in reviewing a bit the EU Deforestation Regulation. The second thing that we do is technical assistance. So over the last 3 years and for the forthcoming years, we have devoted around 14 million euro to work with smallholders so that they understand and they can adapt. And the cost of adaptation is relatively limited. It seems big when you multiply by the number of smallholders, but per smallholders is relatively small. So we've done program of adaptation, and that's just the EU. But the EU member states and the EU together, it has been more than 50 million euro that has been spent to try to work with smallholders in Indonesia. We have also put more transition periods, so not only in the EU Deforestation Regulation, but also in the battery passports, in the carbon, the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, and we have also supported investment in those value chains. So we are doing a number of things, but at the end of the day, our objective is certainly not to exclude, but it is to enable the Indonesian farmers and Indonesian economic operators to become a source for them to use standards and sustainable approach to economic growth as a sign of competitiveness, because most of the big companies now ask for these kind of criteria and standards. So we want to not block but enable Indonesian economic operators to take part in this journey with us.
How is the communication with the government of Indonesia regarding this, and how is their response?
The communication has not always been easy. The government has put forward its point in an assertive way. But at the same time, we have always kept open the channel of cooperation, and I would really like to thank the government for the way they have engaged constructively. And the best evidence of that is the fact that this did not become a hurdle impossible to jump over for the conclusion of the free trade agreement, the CEPA. So there is assertive communication, but also mutual engagement. And at the end of the day, we are moving forward together.
Okay, well, thank you for the wonderful insight and updates regarding that. Still in the global trade, Your Excellency, we also would like to ask and to understand more about the EU's anti-coercion instrument. What is this instrument anyway, and what objective does it seek to achieve, especially regarding the relation of trade between Indonesia and also European Union?
Yes, another sensitive issue. What is economic coercion? Economic coercion is forcing a state to make an economic choice that it wouldn't make without the threat or the action, possibly through tariffs or economic leverage. So we try to have an instrument that is a deterrent. So the first thing I would like to underline on the anti-coercion instrument is that it's a deterrent. It's not something that we use actively as a way to pressure others. It's something that we use when we are attacked and to defend ourselves. So it's a deterrent. The second thing is that it's a multifaceted instrument. It allows a number of policy choice for the EU to adopt so that we deter attempts of economic coercion. What are these possible options? It can be tariffs, obviously, but not only. Something that is very significant is the restriction on trade in services and on intellectual property rights. So, for example, a lot of money is going into social networks and social platforms. So the anti-coercion instrument allows for some restrictions on that. So that's an important element. We have also restrictions possible on access to foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment can be limited. There can be also restrictions on public procurement. So we have a number of policy choices that we can use in order to deter anyone who would try to coerce a member state into adopting something that it wouldn't do without those threats.
So, but it's called anti-coercion instrument. So,
Yes.
but what can we expect from that? If we want to explain that in a simple way regarding the trade relation between the EU and probably other countries.
Well, if one country would, say, threat to impose a lot of tariffs for a country to adopt a certain policy, we could restrict the companies of that country operations in the EU. It is as simple as that.
As simple as that. Okay. Thank you for the elaboration, sir. Now, regarding the current issues as well as we are moving 2026, about the battery passport, the EU battery passport that ultimately are very, very oftenly being discussed in Indonesia because our nickel industries are growing and one of the biggest in the world as well. So we want to hear more about the EU battery passport because it also covers emissions reporting and it tends to supply chain traceability and data standardization. So we would like to hear from you what are the objectives of this policy and how is the EU engaging and socializing this initiative with partners like Indonesia?
Yes. Yes. The battery passport is part of the general approach of the EU to reduce the emissions that come from its consumption. So I know that this principle is not always welcome in Indonesia, but again, as I said, it's not that it's a bureaucratic approach to things. It is a deep sentiment of EU citizens that would like to have an informed choice when they buy something. They're ready to pay a premium if there's less emission, if the product is more sustainable. That's where we stand. So how we translate that into practice? Well, batteries are everywhere. In our laptops, in our phones, and the biggest ones now are coming to our houses and to our cars. So in order for the consumers to make an informed choice, we are doing this digital passport, which is the battery passport, which is a digital tool in which you will have information on the consumption. At the same time, the governments, the authorities, want to make sure that batteries, which are made with a lot of elements beside nickel that are toxic, that it can be recycled in the best way. And for this recycling, we need to have the information on all the components. So you have information for the consumer and information for the authorities so that we can have a circular economy. I know that some economic operators in Indonesia feel this a bit too much. And like for the EU Deforestation Regulation, the aspects linked to the due diligence, the information on emissions, on traceability of supply chain, are a bit delayed so that the operators can adapt to this requirement. Now, that is in general. Now, in practice, most of the nickel that is downstreamed here, so it is the first stage of transformation, goes to one country. The CEPA opens the possibility through a competitive tariff structure to have more investments from Europe, and so to open another market for Indonesia for its nickel, which perhaps would bring a higher added value. But for that, we would need to have a process that is sustainable. So perhaps a bit less with emissions than coal and looking at renewable energy. Indonesia has a formidable potential in a number of renewable energy. The big one at the moment is geothermal. Yeah. So we could really develop a new channel that would satisfy entirely the requirements of this and perhaps bring a higher added value to Indonesian operators.